At heart high, football players deserved respect. They were the ones who gave up their entire summer in favor of 5 a.m. practices every day, except during Hell Week, when they had two-a-days in 100-degree heat. Practices were legendarily difficult, purposefully modeled after boot camp. Most of the injuries happened at practices. Broken ankles, collarbones, heat exhaustion. If you survived, it said something to everyone, teen or adult, on campus. It sounded awful. It sounded impossible. It sounded like something I needed to do. It's hard to explain why a nerdy kid like me, who would regularly spend 45 minutes at Blockbuster on a Friday night trying to decide which version of Blade Runner he wanted to rent, went out for football. The best way I can explain it, the young adult novel Where the Red Fern Grows. See, the scene in that book that always stuck with me was when the main character is hell-bent on chopping down this massive sycamore tree. I mean, he hacks this thing for like 2 days until it falls. And that's what I wanted to do. Surviving heart-high football was my own personal sycamore tree. A symbol that I could survive, that I would not fail. My friend Jace had a more concrete idea as to what he wanted from football. Man, I'm going to get like so ripped this summer, Jace said. I'm going to be like Vin Diesel big. I'm going to like only wear wife beaters next year. Jace was the type of dude who once stuck a paper clip in an electrical socket just to make us laugh. He was the guy who kept a barbarian sword in his closet for no real reason. He was the wild card friend, the person who might have a screw loose, but loose screws make the tilt-a-whirl more exciting, right? Our first 5 a.m. practice confirmed every painful rumor Jace and I had ever heard. It was excruciating. Muscles burned, skin tore, shirts dripped with dew and sweat, and then the puking. One quickly learned to never eat breakfast on before morning practice because it would most likely find its way soaking into the roots of the trees on the far side of the field. Mine was orange and chunky from scrambled eggs. Jace's was pink and milky from Fruit Loops. At the end of the first practice, the morning sun peeked over the horizon. Jace and I walked home. "You smell like shit, dude," he said. He was right. My shirt had caught some major puke chunks and reeked. But I didn't care. I had survived the first day. I had crawled through the mud, ran until my lungs burned, and guzzled glorious water by the gallon. So I said the only thing my exhausted brain could think of. Fuck you too. Coach Toka, a squat man with a booming voice, weirdly pudgy fingers, and an unacknowledged addiction to Slim Fast, made sure we knew every drill. So he could reduce his speaking to a series of code words. Barrel rolls! Suicides! Iron Men! And while he didn't say I needed a haircut, I nonetheless found myself at the Fantastic Sam's that afternoon, asking for a number 2 buzz across my scalp. Around week 3, Jace stopped showing up. Just like that. When I called him, he said he was sick. Kinda. Dude, he said, just like tell them I got like a stomach thing or something. Toka's gonna be pissed, Jace, I said. Jace went quiet for a second. Maybe he'd reconsider. Maybe he'd, meh, he said. Whatever. I'm gonna go play video games. It's just football, dude. I made a choice. Let the kid ditch. When I first started, I thought it was jocks versus nerds, like I was proving something to them by being among their ranks. But they honestly didn't care. Most of the guys on the team were actually incredibly nice dudes. Kind, supportive, always there with advice. Bizarrely and unexpectedly, the practice field was the library from the Breakfast Club. It was the most accepting place on campus. As long as you showed up, did the work, and gave the cliched 110%, you were allowed to be there. It all boiled down to those who do a thing versus those who don't. And as far as I was concerned, Jace wasn't doing a thing. Not only was he failing, but he was failing with gleeful flippancy. As each new grass stain scuffed my knee, I gained another swing against that sycamore tree. Where was he? Why didn't he get how big a deal this was? The day we got our pads, I stood in line outside of an area that doubled as Toka's office/math classroom. I grabbed the bag, an awkward nylon sausage bursting with plastic protective gear, and went to the locker room. I'd never worn a football uniform before. I looked at myself suited up, pants tighter than most Prince videos, cleats that made it impossible to walk on cement, and an oversized helmet that made me look like Rick Moranis' character in Spaceballs. But I felt like I could take on the world in this thing. It felt like armor, like victory, like the sycamore tree was tottering, and although the edge of my axe was dull and lifting it became harder and harder, I needed to keep swinging. When I left the locker room, I saw Jace. He'd missed over a week of practices, which meant he was now Toka's whipping boy. His punishment? Run as many laps as fast as he could for 2 hours. Jace took to his sentence with vigor and started jogging. As he turned into a vaguely people-shaped person crossing the 5-yard line on the opposite end of the field, I felt disgusted by him. Sure, I'd been to his house, swam in his pool, raided his cabinets for Pop-Tarts, but this was Hell Week. You didn't miss a practice during Hell Week. You just didn't. Toka blew his whistle and practice began. An hour in, and burning hot sweat coated my forehead and stung my eyes. Every muscle in my body ached and screamed. "Catch him!" Toka yelled. "Run, lineman!" He was yelling at me. I was supposed to outrun and intercept and tackle a receiver who helped the track team win almost every meet. I failed. Toka threw a temper tantrum, yelling in the unintelligible jabber of all underpaid athletic coordinators. He turned to the small speck in the distance and bellowed, "Jace, 10 more laps!" My mouth slithered into an entirely perverse smile. It was a strange sort of power foreign to me, to have someone else bear the brunt of your punishment. I was happy, downright grateful, that someone felt worse. God help me, not only did I want Jace to suffer, I wanted to make Jace suffer. Toka sent the lineman to the corner of the field for barrel rolls. Jason ran past us, exhausted, dehydrated, barely standing upright, with a fresh puke stain down the front of his practice jersey. And for half a second, I remembered who he was. A dumb kid who once built a WWF website because he was bored. I felt guilty and wanted to say something, a word of encouragement, or even throw him a subtle thumbs up. But I didn't, because this was Hell Week. This was my sycamore tree, and I couldn't stop for anyone. My brief angst threw off the rhythm of the drill, and I didn't pop off the dirt fast enough. As a result, a lineman's boot, weighted down by all the gravity and power of a 200-plus pound frame, dug into the back of my bare hand. I heard a dull crack, and I expected a stigmata-esque wound, but the plastic cleat hadn't punctured the skin. A loud guttural groan was the closest I could get to screaming through the thick plastic mouthguard. The drill came to a stop. "Line!" Toka screamed, his voice hoarse at this point. "The only reason you should stop, the only reason, is if you have a bone sticking out of your body. Move it!" Towards the end of practice, Toka called for suicide drills. We lined up, all of us, including Jace. Toka blew his whistle and we took off, sprinting towards the 10-yard line and back, then to the 20 and back, and the 30 and back. It was around the 40-yard line that I started to feel it. My stomach tightened, as if all intestinal muscle fibers seized about it, choking it. By the time I reached the start again, I collapsed to my knees as hot, vaguely purplish puke dribbled from my mouth and clung to my face mask in thick, gooey, pungent droplets. I hadn't puked in weeks and felt betrayed by my own intestinal tract. "On your feet, lineman," Toka barked at me. I willed myself to stand. My feet staggered towards the 50-yard line. At the end of practice, Toka blew his whistle, and we adjourned to the locker rooms. Everything hurt or burned or ached. My hand was starting to swell. My mask smelled like fresh gastric juice. I sat on the bench in the locker room chugging water. 3 more days of hell remained. When most of the players cleared out, Jace approached me. Dude, Toka's such a dick, huh? I mean, he didn't have to make me run like that, you know? I didn't say anything. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to explain it. Not that I was any sort of great athlete, but I'd done something, and I didn't want to go back to being like him, to doing nothing. I picked up my pads and walked away. Jace's mom wouldn't let him come back to practice after that, and Toka had to concede and let him be water boy. For the rest of the week, he was that annoying kid in khakis yelling, "Good hustle, good hustle." Hell Week ended, and in 2 days, my sophomore year of high school would begin. I'd done it. I'd chopped down my sycamore tree. I felt... meh. I wondered if it had all been worth it. I felt different, sure, but not necessarily better, but different. In the end, my sycamore tree was just a hunk of wood. I looked at Jace, packing up the bottles haphazardly tossed to the ground. I walked over to him. He smiled. We sat under the shade of the tree, where both of us had tossed more cookies than the Oreo aisle of a grocery store. Finally, Jace said, "You smell like shit." I laughed. Fuck you too. Thank you very much.
That's Ed Farragut, everybody. Ed Farragut.